Hello and welcome to the jungle, brought to you by the Riverfront and the folks at Blue Wire. My name is Owen Timmerding, today joined by Seth Shaner. And Seth, kind of a dead period for Bengals news. We got through all the hustle and bustle of the Jamar Chase T. Higgins free agency hubbub, but now we got some good sports going on. You see, I got my Kentucky basketball garb on right in the heart of the tournament, and Reds baseball just started.
Reds baseball started. I was at opening day. It was my 28th opening day, and I had a good time taking my son there. Certainly, up until that ninth inning, everything was going
Ugh.
great. But as I said on the Riverfront Reds show, opening day, you get to a certain age and you just realize it's not results dependent.
Oh yeah.
It's an event unto itself. And while you want to win the game, and while certainly I'm sure Terry Francona found out the hard way that answering tough questions on opening day is a little different than probably a random game in June. It is such an event, and that's kind of like the idea to talk a little bit about the Bengals and the Reds and kind of the existence that they have here in the Queen City.
Yeah, so I kind of like your segue there. I mean, I think it's interesting to say is that there's 162 baseball games. Opening day is obviously super important, especially in Cincinnati, and you want to win that game. But I think I've only been to like one or two opening day wins. And so, but the fanfare and the awesomeness of the parade and the downtown at the banks, it's something special. So we kind of had the idea today to talk about kind of what's similar on the Bengals end for that, because I think people get just as riled up about the Bengals season starting, but it's in a different kind of sense because there's limited home games and just a limited season compared to the MLB slate.
Yeah, and certainly they're in a weird stretch lately where they have opened at home some, but they had like a 6 years in a row where they didn't get to open at home. I would say, and I don't know if you agree with this. We didn't talk about this yet. I would say Ring of Honor night. It's been a prime time night. I would say this is what the third year that now that they've done that. I would say that compares to
I
the
do. I
Bengals
agree.
version of opening day.
I when you first brought this idea up, when you texted me this morning, I was like, what's the one thing that kind of gets everyone super jazzed up about the Bengals? And it's brand new. So it's
Mhm.
like and I think it credit to the Bengals for starting this whole thing, but us Cincinnatians love history and love connecting to their past. And the Bengals have found this niche by being able to honor these incredible people in Bengals history. And those games have been not only awesome performances by the Bengals and kind of special games, but it's been great to have kind of touch all the bases of Bengals history in those moments.
Well, and it's amazing. Like and again, I'm in my mid 40s, so I've for years you talk about like, hey, why aren't they doing more to honor the past? Why aren't they recognizing all these great players? Why aren't they doing more? And it's almost though like that's actually paying off now because it's
Mhm.
such a big thing. And I know Corey Dillon had his deal where he was upset, but there's such a glut of great players that it's going to be like year after year after year. It's going to just be great players are going to be reintroduced to maybe some fans or introduced for the first time. Um, I just think they've hit the nail on the head with this marketing, and it dovetails nicely with the Super Bowl appearance in 21,
Mhm.
the arrival of Joe Burrow in 20. I think every year, and we talked about this with you and Caroline talked about this with the T. Higgins and Jamar Chase deals. They're every year or even every like 3 or 4 months almost. The Bengals are doing something they don't normally do,
Yeah.
and I guess that's a good thing, and it's been nice.
I think it's interesting that you say reintroduced because obviously I follow the Bengals probably more than kids my age. And even when I was 10, 11, 12, I knew who the likes of Boomer Esiason and Ken Anderson was. I knew who Boomer was because he was on TV. And my dad was like, yeah, that guy played for the Bengals. He was really awesome. And I looked up some of his highlights. And then you read about the Ken Anderson MVP season. But there are kids who are 10, 11, 12 now who don't know anything about that. They go to the Bengals stadium and they see those names
Mhm.
on the stadium, the Anderson, the Chad Johnson. I mean, there are kids now who probably don't even really know a lot about Ocho Cinco. And then you see that kind of stuff and how incredible he was, and just really reading stuff and looking at highlights. And I mean, those are the guys up there now are like the core 7 or 8 players of Bengals
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, they're the foundational pieces, and for a reason. I guess the other thing is if we're comparing the two, and it's the Reds and the Bengals, certainly have their unique niches within southwestern Ohio, within Reds country as they refer to it throughout the area. I guess the other thing is, and You, if you haven't done it before, Owen, should go look up George Carlin, the comedian. Look up his comparison between baseball and football. Even done in the '60s, I think when he recorded that, it was hilarious and really staggering. As you sit back and think, yeah, that's true. But even baseball, baseball has been, over time, it's more about numbers. And I know the steroid era kind of has ruined some of the numbers because obviously the home run totals and the different, records that have been broken. But baseball is the kind of game where you sit there and you look around more. You're not as transfixed straight on that, 50-yard line or whatever through an entire game. And you might be, if you're in the stands, and I know the Reds kind of do it a little funny because all the retired numbers are behind home plate. And so therefore you're never really trained unless you're in the outfield seats to look straight at that. But you can imagine being a little kid or a father and son going to a game and, well, Dad, what do those numbers mean? And oh boy, I get to tell you now about Johnny Bench and Pete Rose and, all these guys, Barry Larkin, and there's different things around Great American Ballpark that would just completely get you to bring a kid. And not all kids are the same. Look, I have two sons. One of them is as sports crazy as it gets, and the other one, wants to go get more popcorn or ice cream or something. That's it. But it's interesting to me as I think of the two. And, for me, one of the funniest parts is when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl in 2021 season, the following opening day, 2022, I thought, and that actually was the day that Phil Castellini put his foot in his mouth too.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. I thought that the Reds were really using the Bengals fame and the Bengals because Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase got a louder ovation than any Reds player that day. And I remember that day, there were so many. Like yesterday, I saw some Bengals hats and jerseys in the stands. But that day in 2022, there were tons of Bengals jerseys and T-shirts in the stands for Reds opening day. And there's a whole generation or two or three where even though the Reds weren't that good either, it wasn't a Bengals town at all. It was more of a Reds town. And so I just find it interesting to see as they go back and forth. There's no reason you can't have both be great. And I hope, that's what we all want. But it's been interesting to see them kind of yo-yo back and forth as far as, and sadly, sometimes it's ownership gets, which ownership is being, in the doghouse at a certain given time too. That's been part of it.
Yeah, you're right. I think there is like some Bengals craze that's been happening these last 5 years, and it's rightfully so. It is. I do vividly remember that opening day, and I mean, Joe Burrow is. You get these guys, and I love Joey Votto, and I think he gets his flowers across the MLB, but he was never a worldwide sports megastar.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Burrow is like that. And Cincinnati has never had a celeb. Maybe Junior is probably is the closest thing to that in Pete Rose. But the Bengals just definitely have not had someone who's like a nationally known celebrity. Like there are non-sports people who know who Joe Burrow is. It's like it's getting close to that.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how what you said that the Bengals and the Reds have never really synced up with their success, and the weeds of that are you can't really even explain it. But I think it is interesting how, and we talked about this a little bit too, is I think the Bengals and Reds relationship is actually really special in how they're right by each other. They're both in the downtown area, and they really seem to feed off of each other's success and honor their past at the same time.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is especially when they were co-tenants in Riverfront Stadium, and especially at the end of those days, I don't think the two franchises got along at all. I mean, you just all you had to do is go to Riverfront Stadium or Synergy Field, as it was known later, and see, like, it just doesn't sync up at all. And I know, obviously, Hamilton County passed the thing that got the two stadiums built. And the upsetting part, if you're just a Reds fan, is the Bengals jumped at the chance, and the Bengals got their money right away, and they kind of used up a lot of it. And so Great American Ballpark, they dragged their feet. The Reds ownership did. It wasn't a smooth process. And so it's very interesting as you look back to think of now, like you're saying. I mean, in social media accounts are what they are. Everybody does this now, but you think of the Bengals wishing the Reds a happy opening day. The Reds do the same when football season starts. it does feel like there's more of a relationship there. And I know even like Mike Brown and Marty Brennaman are close. And, I don't know about the Castellinis and Mike Brown and the Brown family, but it does feel like it's more hand in hand now. And one more thing I will say, the idea that the Reds kind of did that in 22 and kind of exploited it a little bit, that's not unusual. I was actually at a Reds Royals game in Kansas City a few years ago, and the Chiefs said actually after the 22 season, the Chiefs won that Super Bowl after beating the Bengals in the AFC Championship game, and they had the Chiefs at the Royals that night. And I'm here to tell you, that's a 100 loss Royals team that year, and they did it up big for those Chiefs, and they put Royals and Chiefs logos on the same towels, shirts, all these things they could, and you could see it there.
Yeah.
Again, it's not only Cincinnati that's ever happened.
Yeah, totally.
But I do remember walking into the stadium in 22, hearing Phil Castellini's remarks, and then looking down the field and like, oh, I see what we're doing here. And it's the Bengals kind of getting the loudest ovation, and you could hear the murmur across the stadium about Reds ownership even then. So it is what it is. But I'm just like I said, they both can be loved, and they're just loved differently, wouldn't you say? I mean, you grew up there, like the passion for a Reds baseball team is just different than Bengals.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I love the Reds so much. They're my employer. So I've gone so far to do that. I've loved my time being a Reds fan, and it's been even more special to be a part of the organization, a small part thereof, but it's been great. And you're right, it is different because for the Reds, it's a long season and it's easier. I'd say it's easier to follow for my sake because it's just like you can get really into it and get kind of into the weeds. But the NFL, it's this 17-game sprint where you kind of have to be all in the whole time and you can't really let up. And I was kind of blessed. I said earlier that the Reds and Bengals have never really synced up with their success, but there was kind of a brief 2009 to 2013 where both teams were actually pretty good, and the Bengals made the playoffs twice, and so did the Reds. So I kind of got lucky with my first taste of the Reds and the Bengals at the same time, being when they were competing for division and playoffs and stuff like that. But I think it is interesting because it is a different type of fandom.
It is.
And it's that same, like you said, about the differences between baseball and football. Is baseball is kind of like, oh, it's just kind of nonchalant. You're sitting there, you're enjoying the game, and football, you're standing up the whole time. You're screaming. Every first down is the biggest deal, and every incomplete pass is the biggest thing in the world. And it's even heightened now, I'd say, for the Bengals, is because they're good, and you have to pay attention. Like I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I still watched every Bengals game, but I'd be like on my phone a little bit. I'd be watching someone else. I'd keep my eye on the second TV, watching the red zone, checking out other stuff like that. Now I'm locked into every play, and it's like unacceptable if you're not.
I will give you one example where they can be similar, football and baseball.
Mm-hmm.
In 2023, McLean comes up, and then Ellie comes up about
that is true
later. That stretch where they had the nice, big 10-game winning streak, and they played really well, and you got to know these young players more. And for me, it's with my son, well, both my sons, but especially my oldest. That stretch is like they don't even have to make the playoffs. You can fall in love with a group of guys, and sometimes what's been lost is if the Reds sell off everybody and try to rebuild that middle area, that 2017 and 18 specifically, and then maybe even 21 and 22, I think of, like you lose your identity as a group because now you have to get to know all these new guys, and sometimes the new guys aren't really playing that well. Well, that stretch in 23 let's compare that to the playoff run in 21.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're right. It's a sprint. It's weak. It's fewer games, obviously, but when there's so much on the line in the playoffs, all of a sudden you're spending every day from the time the game ends to the next game in the playoffs. Like you can't help but talk about it around the water cooler, so to speak, or throughout your days, calling your friends, texting. That's when I'm texting more with my friends, and so that. And I got it this year a little bit with Ohio State's football playoff.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you're in it, it feels like you're in the groundswell of a big wave.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, if the Reds can make the playoffs, then I want to feel what that's like again, obviously. But I felt it in 2023, getting to know those kids, the younger players, that kind of thing. And then that's where it can be similar. I mean, remember that in the playoff run with the Bengals on the Super Bowl run, what was his name? Will Johnson who was the linebacker that they signed him off the scout team and
Oh,
I'm
I
blanking
know
on
who. So
it
am
might be
I. I
John
know you're talking
Smith.
about the.
But I mean, we knew who he was all of a sudden,
Yeah,
he made that one play on the goal line, right? And it's
yeah.
like, or even Sam Hubbard, his legend grew, right? When he sacked Mahomes and Von, just guy after guy, week after week, you become more associated. Like, no, we don't know them personally. We're not hanging out with these players, obviously, but in the week to week, the day to day, you have more of an identity with them. That's when it's really fun, even regardless of whether they win it all or not.
And that's what's been so fun about these Bengals teams is that they seem relatable. They are fun. We've kind of all grown up with this crew together, and they're all homegrown guys too, which I think is great. And it is fun. I mean, I reminisce about the playoff run all the time because you just like you crave that feeling when you're in it, and then now like that's what you want when you're a sports fan. And I think it's been incredible to see these young guys on the Bengals grow. I mean, Joe Burrow, we saw him as just this. I'm not going to say meek, but I mean he's grown into this voice that he's never had before. He's a professional
Mm-hmm.
now. Jamar Chase is a professional. Like I read a really great article. I don't remember who it was by, but it was about Jamar Chase's first year in the NFL, and it was talking about how remember in training camp
Mm-hmm.
when he had the drops and everyone was like, "Oh my goodness, he's going to be terrible," like because he's just lost it. But we've totally seen him grow throughout this whole process. And I think, and credit to him for this too, is we saw Jamar Chase grow a lot last year.
Mm-hmm.
He, if you remember, I was quite frustrated with Jamar Chase for his first 3 or 4 weeks of play because of the contract holdout. You could tell he wasn't ready. In those first 2 games, he had a couple giant, like, remember when he lashed out in that Chiefs game?
Yep.
And then I was like, what are we doing, man? I was like, you cost us 15 yards here. But you didn't see that the rest of the year. And then I think it's also telling with some of the stuff he said in his press conference. And Carolina talked about this too, but I think it's so important to harp on this is whether you like this or not, obviously you want your players to want to be where they're playing. But Jamar Chase came out and said, the reporter asked him, what do you like about playing in Cincinnati? Like, why did you want to stay here? And he said, you want me to be honest? And the reporter goes, yeah. He goes, because I can focus on football. I loved it. I loved it. And I think it's incredible that he is open and honest about that. Jamar Chase last year would have been like, it would have been some sort of nonchalant, like not halfway truthful answer. I think seeing these guys grow up, I mean, you're right. The only personal connection we have with these guys is that we wear the colors and that we go to the games. But it's incredible to see these guys grow as professionals in their field. And we're totally seeing that on the Bengals end, especially because we saw these guys get drafted and now they're tenured NFL guys. So it's like, we've totally seen them transform their lives before our eyes.
Well, and it's when they get the locked up long-term deals
Yeah.
too, that as a fan, you can really even, I don't want to say trust, but you put your faith or even my youngest son, he loved T. Higgins his rookie year, just loved him. He was this little young kid, and I got him a jersey. Well, he switched to number 5, and my kid's like, well, why is he wearing number 5? I got my 85 here. And I said, I know, buddy, but I don't even know if he's going to play here much longer. And then when Joe Burrow did what he did there after the Cowboys game and last season and talked about how important it was to get T back, to re-sign him, I told my son, if he signs long-term beyond a 1-year deal coming up, I will get you another jersey. And that's another huge thing that compares between football and baseball. Like, who are we putting our trust in long term?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Joey Votto certainly, obviously they didn't win as much as we would have liked, but Joey Votto, me being able to, I mean, I've said it before. I named my son Joey. Okay, he was born just after his MVP season in 2010. There's a correlation there, and my wife doesn't want to admit it, but there is. All right, and so then when he signed that long-term deal, it's like, oh my goodness, we can have Joey Votto here for that long. I mean, I was an adult, but I bought a Josh Hamilton jersey, all right, in
Yeah.
2007. That thing was good for all of 90 games.
Yeah.
All right. And it's not his fault he got traded, but there's a comfort there. And if the Reds could sign Ellie for 5 or 6 years, or buy out at least 1 or 2 years of his free agency, which I doubt will happen, but if they could, or if they could give him if they could do a Bobby Witt Jr. deal, we would have somebody that's our guy. And
Yeah.
right now we've got that. And I think we're super proud to be able to say Jamar, Joe, and T, those are our guys. And I think
And
that's what
yeah.
kind of converges well, because as fans, we look for guys that we can glom onto for more than just a cup of coffee.
I think this is the most secure I've felt as a Bengals fan in probably the 20 years I've watched this team, because it's like you just never knew. And everyone always seemed disgruntled. And Andy was never gonna be like, give me this, give me this, give me this. But Carson was super outspoken, and so was Joe Burrow. And like you had those guys for a while, but it was nice to kind of clear the narrative, that because all you heard for 3 years was, well, hope you enjoyed from one of my friends in Cleveland. Shout out them if you're gonna listen to this. Like,
Yeah.
you guys, like, we showed you. Like, they kept telling me ad nauseum, like, hope you enjoyed this because you got one more year. Every year they would just click down one more. And
Yep.
so it's like it's nice to have that security is probably the best point. And obviously, I mean, we feel a lot different than, I'm sure Jamar Chase is kicking his feet up after signing a $40 million per year contract. He feels super secure right now. And I feel super secure that he's going to be a Bengal for the next 5 years. But it's just little things like that that make fandom go a long way, I'd say, because you just want to have your guys. And Burrow, I mean, he'll play his first at least 7, 8 years in the NFL at Cincinnati. And then who knows what happened? We're not going to talk about that because we're still a long ways away. But this window is now exploded, and we are or expanded, and we got guys. We have guys we can hold on to and be proud about.
All right. So put a pin in this, because the next time Caroline can't make it, and I'm going to help you out here, I want to talk about the differences between Carson Palmer and Joe Burrow, because you struck something. And I'll just say that there's a reason why it's different. And you mentioned Carson being outspoken. Carson was really only outspoken at the end.
Yeah.
And to me, that was actually part of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
because he didn't speak up enough when he could have maybe gotten things the way he wanted it, or try to be a part of it more. But that's, again, I think that's a whole show topic. Let's do that
I
sometime.
agree. But Joe has been pretty outspoken from the beginning.
That's right. That's right.
So I think it's interesting. Any other Bengals stuff you want to pop up on? I didn't really read a lot about it, but I think they're maybe making some leverage on Trey Hendrickson. They're not going to trade him. I read something, if that's correct.
It looks like that's the case, but also I'm here for, and I actually tweeted out last week, I'm here for Joe Burrow taking Brandon Scherf out to dinner at Jeff Ruby's, and let's get this deal done. A 1-year deal, maybe a 2nd-year option, something short term. He's so good at, like, he's just one of those guys that in the trenches you'd want. And I think that's what they need to do now that they, they're the free agent class is pretty much swept through.
Yeah.
But he's still out there. The Bengals still have a need. I'd love to see it happen before the draft.
Let's go. That'd be great. Yeah, I think it's awesome. I would love to have him too, because I just think he's super put together and be an awesome piece. One more thing to wrap up, non-Bengals related. Sweet 16 games yesterday, a couple more today. Who's your Final Four, Seth, the national champion, in case we don't talk to each other again before then?
My bracket says Auburn is the national
Okay.
champion, and I did that almost throwing up in my mouth because, Bruce Pearl and all that.
Yeah.
That's on my bracket. I am going to actually watch the game with some UK fans tonight. So my oldest son has Tennessee winning it all, so I know you're not good with that.
Yeah.
I will say this, and this will be a throwback, and I'm not trying to do this on purpose. When I was a kid, I was probably a freshman in high school, maybe. Duke played Cal in the tournament, and a young point guard named Jason Kidd scored like 35 against Bobby Hurley. Bobby Hurley was like the last guy remaining from the 91-92 title teams.
Yeah.
And Bobby Hurley had around 30. Cooper Flagg against Caleb Love last night reminded me of that game. But because Duke won anyway, but Love probably even outplayed Flagg just a little bit. There was a lot of similarities there, and so actually that was and I have to admit, I went to the Reds. We did the whole thing all day. I got home. I was fighting falling asleep during that
Same.
game, that Duke game last night. I really wish I wasn't, because that game, even as I'm watching, I'm like, man, this really does remind me of that game back in '94. I guess it would have been 90. Yeah. So pretty cool. Duke. I'd be worried if I was anybody in their way right now.
Yeah.
I really would.
I think that Duke Bama game is going to be incredible. I've had Houston winning my whole bracket. I had Michigan State in my Final Four. They're still alive. I had so I think Michigan State wins today, and then they beat Auburn. And then I think they come out of that region. I think Duke probably wins their region. And then I think Kentucky wins today, loses to Houston,
Okay.
and then we'll see. Then I think the bottom half, I think Florida probably wins, and it'll be kind of a chalky all 1 seed and a 2 seed tournament. I still think Houston wins because
even in the chaos of NIL and transfers and all this thing that's causing what's happening right now, back in January, I was kind of looking at it and I'm like, Coach Izzo's got it again. Like,
yeah,
he goes to so many Final Fours. I know he only won the one title in 2000. He feels like the Atlanta Braves to me of the 90s.
That's a really great comparison.
But I've got some friends who are Michigan State guys, and I hate to admit it to them, but it's looked that way, and so I guess I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan State, kind of continues their run. But right now, my feeling is Duke's going to win it all. So there we are.
I was listening to somebody today, and I'm like, why do I not hate Duke as much as I used to? And it's because I think I actually really like Cooper Flagg.
It happens.
He's not super dislikable, and we've just totally gone off the rails about Bengals, but I love talking about college hoops, and it
happens. Even like I remember the Fab Five. I hated Michigan.
Oh,
but I was
super fun.
I was in junior high, early high school. And Fab Five were playing, and it's like, dude, you couldn't help it. And even Tom Brady, like I called his games. I called 2 of his games against Ohio State. Well, actually, technically 3, but I don't remember if he played in one of them. But yeah, I called the games, and he wasn't. Nobody at Michigan liked him. Like he was. They were always looking to replace him, and it's hilarious to me to watch them claim him now. But even as a pro, I respected Tom Brady so much.
Yeah,
it is what it is. It's fine. But no, Cooper Flagg is fun to watch right now, and it's going to be interesting. The rest of the tournament, to me, the boringness of the first weekend, I think now we're kind of getting into it. And I think it's actually going to pay off pretty big.
I think it is too. And I think it's kind of a bad sports fan take to say that it was a boring beating of the tournament, because this just means the actual teams will end up be playing against each other.
That's true.
I mean, I think that's a wired, not tired kind of take right there. So, all right, folks, thank you for tuning in to Welcome to the Jungle. As always, we will update you as soon as we get any more information about Cincinnati Bengals. Kind of a dead period right now, but we'll keep coming at you, at least with weekly episodes. On behalf of Owen Timmerding and Seth Shaner, thank you for tuning into today's show.